I saved for years to buy a home, but my mom spent it all on a luxury car. I never thought I'd be here, writing this out, but here we are. I'm 28 years old, and for as long as I can remember, I've been working toward one thing, buying a house. It wasn't just a dream, it was my escape. Growing up, money was always tight. My parents struggled to make ends meet, and I learned early on that things were never going to be easy. Rent was always late, bills piled up, and luxuries were a foreign concept. Every month felt like we were walking a tightrope, just trying to keep our heads above water. I didn't want that life for myself. I didn't want to grow up fearing that I'd lose my roof over my head or worry about whether the lights would stay on. So, I made a decision early on that would shape my life. I was going to own a home one day. That was my way out, my way of breaking the cycle. But getting there wasn't easy. It wasn't about buying the latest gadgets or going out to eat with friends. For 6 years, I sacrificed. I worked long hours at multiple jobs, barely slept, and watched my friends take vacations and buy new clothes while I stayed at home, putting every cent I could into a separate savings account. I didn't even let myself get close to that money, out of sight, out of mind. It was all for one purpose, a down payment for my house. And every day, it felt like I was getting closer. That number in my bank account grew bit by bit, and with each deposit, my dream felt more and more tangible. The feeling of accomplishment of working so hard and sticking to a plan for years, it was like I could almost reach out and touch it. That's what made it so hard to believe when it all disappeared in the blink of an eye. It was a quiet night, the kind where everything felt perfect, just the calm before the storm. I'd finally saved enough, and tomorrow would be the day. The day I'd transfer the money, sign the papers, and start my new life in a home that was mine. I sat down, opened my bank app, and felt a rush of excitement as I prepared for that final move. But then I froze. I stared at the screen, my mind refusing to process what I was seeing. The balance was 0. No, that couldn't be right. I refreshed the page, closed the app, opened it again. Still 0? My heart started to race. I checked the history. 2 large transactions had been made, both in the past month. The withdrawals had been done in person at a branch not far from where we lived. And then I saw it. The name of the person who authorized those withdrawals, Helen. My stomach sank. I felt dizzy, like the floor was falling away beneath me. My hand trembled as I dialed her number, my mind racing with 1,000 questions. What was going on? Why wasn't the money there? When she picked up, I heard that all too familiar tone in her voice, impatient, almost annoyed. "Mom, what happened to my money?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, though panic was creeping in. "Oh, yeah. I was going to tell you about that," she said, her voice calm, almost too calm. I didn't know what to think. "What do you mean you were going to tell me about it?" I replied, the words barely leaving my lips before I heard her respond. "I took it. I bought a car," she said matter-of-factly. "It's a BMW. Isn't that exciting?" "Exciting?" I couldn't believe my ears. My chest tightened as the weight of her words hit me. "Why did you take my money? Without asking me?" I demanded, my voice rising now. She didn't seem fazed. "Well, you weren't using it yet. I needed it. You're young, you have plenty of time to save more. I've never had anything nice in my life, and I deserve this." Her words felt like a slap in the face. I couldn't process it. This wasn't just about money, it was about everything I'd worked for. "You deserve it? You took 6 years of my hard work, my sacrifices, and spent it on a car." I choked out. She sighed like I was being unreasonable. "You should be happy for me, honestly. After everything I've done for you, this is the least you can do." "The least I can do?" My mind was spinning. The 6 years of grinding, the late nights, the sacrifices, all of it didn't matter. She took it, and now she was telling me it was no big deal. The more she talked, the angrier I got, but the anger was also mixed with a sickening realization she didn't feel sorry. She didn't see this as betrayal. To her, this was just what she was entitled to. "Are you going to pay me back?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. She laughed, a cold, dismissive sound that sent chills down my spine. "I'll pay you back when I can, but don't rush me. It's not like you need it right now." I could feel my hands shaking as I held the phone to my ear, the world feeling more and more unreal. I hung up before I could say anything else, too stunned, too hurt to keep listening. I sat there motionless for what felt like hours. All I could think about was how easily she took it, my trust, my hard work, my future, and just threw it away for a car she didn't even need. I wasn't sure what hurt more, the loss of the money or the realization that the one person I thought I could always count on was capable of doing this to me. The days that followed felt like I was living in a fog. I couldn't escape the image of her voice, so calm and dismissive as if it was perfectly normal to take 6 years of my life's work without a second thought. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the number in my bank account, the one that once held all my dreams, now empty, as if it had never been there at all. My anger only grew the more I thought about it, a bubbling rage that I couldn't shake, but it was mixed with something deeper, something I couldn't put a name to. It felt like a weight on my chest, pressing me down with every breath. How could she do this? My mother, the woman who raised me, taught me right from wrong, who was supposed to be the one person I could trust above all others. How could she so easily justify what she did? And the worst part was she didn't even seem to care. She didn't apologize, didn't ask for forgiveness. She expected me to understand. My own mother had taken my future and used it for herself, and she didn't even feel guilty about it. It was a betrayal that shook me to the core. I spent nights just sitting there, staring at the walls of my apartment, my thoughts spiraling. The anger was there, no doubt, but there was something else too. Guilt? A gnawing, insidious guilt that I couldn't get rid of. Was I being too harsh? She was my mother. I owed her something, didn't I? She raised me, sacrificed for me, made me who I am today. All those memories, her sacrifices, the hard work she put in to give me what little she could, were flashing before my eyes, and a voice inside me kept whispering, "She deserves it, doesn't she?" Was I being selfish? Maybe I was just angry because it was my money. Maybe I was the one who was wrong for being so upset, for not just letting it go. But this wasn't just money, I thought. This was everything I had worked for. This was my dream, the life I'd promised myself. And she had stolen it. How could I forgive that? How could I forgive her? But then another voice inside my head kept asking, what about family? What about everything she's done for you? I had always been told that family comes first, that no matter what, you stick together. But what if family wasn't supposed to mean accepting betrayal? What if I had to take care of myself for once? I wanted to scream, to throw everything away, but there was something pulling me back like a chain around my heart. She was my mother. I could barely sleep, and when I did, I dreamt of her face, full of justification, explaining why she needed it, why she deserved it. I woke up to an empty apartment, a void I couldn't fill. The more I thought about it, the more the guilt overwhelmed me. I hadn't just lost my money, I was losing something far more precious, my trust in her. And that was harder to bear than anything else. The worst part was, I knew I couldn't keep living like this. I couldn't keep questioning myself, caught in this emotional whirlpool that left me both broken and bitter. I had to make a decision. Was I going to cut her out of my life for good? Or would I forgive her, let it go, and try to move forward? The idea of cutting her off felt impossible. The thought of living without her was suffocating, but the idea of letting this slide? That was even worse. I found myself standing at the crossroads, caught between the past and the future, between guilt and anger, love and betrayal. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw the empty account again. And in that moment, I realized the truth. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about respect. About boundaries. If I didn't set them now, I would never find peace. I knew what I had to do. The days after the confrontation with my mom were a blur. I tried to shut everything out, stayed in my apartment, avoided calls, and kept to myself. The last thing I wanted to do was talk to anyone, but the universe seemed determined to drag me back into the chaos. I started getting messages. Texts, phone calls, voicemails. Relatives I hadn't heard from in months were suddenly reaching out, all with the same message. How could I do this to my mother? It started innocently enough. My aunt sent a message, "We heard about what happened and we want to talk about it. Your mom's been through so much." At first, I thought maybe they just wanted to check in to offer some support. But it didn't take long for the tone to shift. One cousin sent me a long text accusing me of being selfish. "Your mom worked so hard to give you everything you have. This is how you repay her. You should be ashamed of yourself." Another, even angrier, said, "She deserves something nice after all the sacrifices she made for you. You're being completely ungrateful." I could feel my blood start to boil. What were they hearing? What version of this story were they buying? Every message felt like a punch in the gut, each one repeating the same narrative Helen had spun to them. I was the bad guy, the ungrateful son who couldn't see past my own selfish desires. I tried explaining, tried telling them that it wasn't just about money, that it was about trust, about respect. But the more I spoke, the more they sided with her. They didn't even want to hear my side of the story. It was like a wall had been built around me and I was being suffocated by it. The hardest part was seeing how easily they turned on me, how quick they were to defend her without even asking for my perspective. It felt like I was drowning in a sea of voices, all telling me I was wrong. I couldn't shake the feeling of isolation. The more they sided with her, the angrier I became. How could they just let this go? How could they accept the lies she was telling? I was the one who'd spent years saving, sacrificing everything for a future I'd worked so hard to build. And now they were accusing me of disrespecting her for wanting to protect that? But then a conversation with a close friend opened my eyes. I met up with Sarah, one of the few people who had listened to me without judgment. As I was telling her what had been happening with the family, she looked at me with a strange expression on her face, almost like she knew something I didn't. "You know she did the same thing to James, right?" she said, her voice quiet but steady. For a second, I thought I'd misheard her. "What?" "Your brother," Sarah continued. "She borrowed money from him years ago when he was saving up for college. He was working too, putting aside everything he could, and she asked him for money to renovate the house. He gave it to her, but she never paid him back." My mind went blank. James? My brother? I hadn't known any of this. I never even suspected. I couldn't understand why he'd never said anything, why he kept it to himself. Sarah continued. "He confronted her about it, but her response was exactly the same as what she told you. I needed it more than you did, and I'll pay you back when I can. But like you, he never saw that money again." My heart sank as the pieces began to fall into place. This wasn't just a one-time mistake. This wasn't a simple lapse in judgment. This was a pattern. A pattern of using her kids' hard-earned money whenever it suited her, then brushing it off with excuses when the truth came out. My brother had fallen into the same trap, and he had let it go, just like I had always let it go, always giving her the benefit of the doubt. But now the truth was clear. Helen wasn't just making a mistake. She was taking advantage of us. She had done it with me, with James, and probably countless other times before. And the worst part? She didn't feel guilty about it. She never had. She felt entitled to take what wasn't hers, to use her children's sacrifices for her own benefit. I felt a coldness seep into my bones. The anger I had felt earlier was replaced by something even stronger, betrayal. But now I also felt a strange sense of clarity. I had always thought I was alone in this, that I was the only one who had been wronged. But my brother's story gave me a new perspective. I wasn't alone. This wasn't just a mistake or a momentary lapse. This was who she was. And it was time I faced that truth. I had to do something about it. I couldn't let her walk all over me, not anymore. And I certainly couldn't let the rest of the family continue to support her lies. The question now was, how far was I willing to go to make things right? How much of myself was I willing to sacrifice to finally take control of my own life? The answer, I realized, was everything. I knew it had to happen. I couldn't keep running from it, couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine when it was all falling apart. I had thought about it endlessly, torn between the guilt and the anger, between the family I grew up with and the truth I now knew about who my mother really was. But I was done hiding from the reality. One afternoon, a week after the family drama started, I was sitting in my apartment, staring at the blank screen of my phone. I hadn't heard from Helen for a few days, and I wasn't sure if that was a good thing or a bad thing. But then the doorbell rang. It was her. I froze. She stood there, a smile on her face as if nothing had happened. And parked right in front of my building, gleaming in the sunlight, was the BMW. She leaned in, holding the keys up like it was a peace offering. "Hey, Michael," she said casually, as if we hadn't just had the most devastating argument of our lives. "I thought maybe you could take it for a spin. It might help you see why I needed it. You know, it's not so bad." She handed me the keys, a smile still plastered on her face, like nothing was wrong. My hands clenched into fists. This wasn't some small misunderstanding anymore. This was her trying to win me back with the very thing she had stolen from me. It felt like a slap in the face. The anger I had kept bottled up for so long began to boil over, and for the first time, I didn't care about keeping the peace or worrying about her feelings. I was done. "No," I said, the word coming out sharper than I intended. "I don't want your car. I want you to understand what you did, and I want you to take responsibility for it." She blinked, looking taken aback. "What do you mean? I thought you'd be happy for me. I've worked hard all my life, Michael. I deserve something nice for once." I could feel my chest tighten. This was it, the moment I had been waiting for. The moment where I finally stood up for myself. "You took my money, Mom," I said, my voice steady but fierce. "You took 6 years of my life, my sacrifices, and used it for yourself. And now you're standing here acting like you're the victim. You don't get to do that." Her face shifted, the smile fading into something more defensive. "I didn't mean to hurt you. I'm your mother, Michael. You should respect me. After everything I've done for you." "Respect is earned, not demanded," I interrupted, my voice rising now. "And you lost mine the moment you took my savings without asking, without even thinking about what it meant for me." For a long moment, there was silence. The tension hung in the air, thick and suffocating. I could see the emotions flicker across her face, anger, frustration, guilt, and something else, maybe fear. But she wouldn't say it. She wouldn't admit she was wrong. "Michael, I've sacrificed so much for you," she said, her voice shaking slightly. I raised you, I gave up everything for you. I deserve this. I don't have anything nice. And now I'm supposed to just be treated like this. I could feel the weight of her words, but I didn't flinch. You don't get to take my hard-earned money and then tell me I should be happy for you. You don't get to manipulate me anymore to make me feel guilty for not giving you more than you've already taken. I stepped back, my chest rising and falling with every breath, the heat of the moment burning away any doubt I had left. I'm done, Mom. I'm done making excuses for you. Her face twisted with anger. Fine. If you want to act like a stranger, that's your choice. Don't come crying to me when you need help someday. You'll regret this, Michael. The words stung, but they didn't break me. I had heard them before, so many times over the years, her trying to guilt me into submission, trying to make me feel responsible for her actions. But not anymore. I stood there, watching her turn on her heel and walk back to the car. The keys in her hands seemed to weigh more than anything else in that moment, the sound of her footsteps echoing in my mind long after she had driven away. When the door closed behind her, I felt the finality of it. The relationship I had known, the one where I trusted her completely, was gone. This wasn't about money anymore. It wasn't about the car. It was about control. And I had let go of that control for too long. I looked around my apartment, the silence almost deafening. For the first time in weeks, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, peace. I wasn't the one who had failed her. She was the one who had failed me. And I wasn't going to keep allowing her to drag me down with her. The boundary had been set and I wasn't going to let anyone, least of all my mother, cross it again. As I sat down, I took a deep breath, realizing that this was just the beginning. The road ahead would be difficult, but for the first time in my life, I was taking control. And I wasn't looking back. The days following my final confrontation with Helen were some of the most difficult of my life. I had made the decision to cut her off, to stop allowing her to manipulate and control me, but the weight of that decision still lingered like a heavy fog that refused to lift. It wasn't just about the money anymore, it was about reclaiming my self-respect and setting boundaries that had been crossed for too long. I knew I couldn't just let this go. I couldn't let her off the hook for what she had done, no matter how many times she tried to justify her actions. But I also wasn't the kind of person who wanted to escalate things unnecessarily. So, after much thought, I decided to consult with a lawyer. The conversation was brief but powerful. The lawyer confirmed what I had suspected. Helen's actions could indeed be classified as theft. She had taken my money, used it for something unrelated to my well-being, and never bothered to ask for permission. I could pursue legal action, but a part of me hesitated. I didn't want to drag this out, didn't want to turn my life into a courtroom battle. But I also knew that my principle, my sense of self-worth, was more important than keeping things civil or maintaining the status quo. If I let this go, it would only reinforce the idea that she could do whatever she wanted with my life. After discussing the options, the lawyer suggested we send a demand letter first, a formal request for repayment, giving her one last chance to make things right before things escalated further. I agreed. This wasn't about revenge. This wasn't about trying to punish her. It was about standing up for myself, about showing her that she couldn't just take what wasn't hers and expect there to be no consequences. Days later, the letter was sent. I waited anxiously, wondering how she would react. Part of me hoped she would finally realize the gravity of her actions, that this was her opportunity to make amends. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. What came next, however, was something I hadn't expected. A few days after the letter was delivered, I received a call from her. Her voice was different this time, not angry, not defensive, but filled with something else. Desperation. She admitted that she hadn't paid off the car. Not only was she behind on the payments, but the BMW was at risk of being repossessed. The money I had saved had gone toward the down payment, but the rest of it was tied up in loan payments she couldn't afford. A sick feeling settled in my stomach. I didn't know whether to feel anger or pity. How had it come to this? How had someone who had always been so proud of taking care of me, of being strong for me, ended up in this kind of mess? For the first time, I understood. It wasn't about being malicious. It wasn't about trying to hurt me. Helen's actions had been driven by desperation, by a need to escape her own financial struggles. She saw my savings as a way out, as a way to finally have something nice, something she could be proud of. But in the process, she had taken more than just my money, she had taken my trust. Despite everything, I couldn't help but feel a flicker of sympathy for her. The truth was, I had always known that she was struggling, that things had never been easy for her. But I had also realized that her struggles didn't give her the right to take advantage of me, to exploit the trust one had placed in her. In the end, after much back and forth, Helen agreed to mediation. The car was sold, and part of the money was returned to me. It wasn't the full amount, but it was enough to give me closure. It was enough to know that I wasn't just a source of financial support for her, that I wasn't going to keep allowing her to take what wasn't hers. The road to this point had been long, and at times it felt like I was fighting an uphill battle. But I had learned something invaluable in the process, that setting boundaries is not about punishing others, it's about protecting yourself. It's about knowing that your worth isn't tied to how much you're willing to sacrifice for others. Sometimes you have to walk away from people you love in order to protect your own peace. Helen and I haven't spoken since. The distance between us has grown, and I don't know if things will ever go back to how they were. But I've made my peace with that. I've learned that unconditional forgiveness, when it comes at the expense of your own well-being, is not always healthy. I've learned that sometimes letting go is the most loving thing you can do for both yourself and the other person. In the end, I've come to realize that this experience wasn't just about the money. It was about growth, about finding my voice, and about reclaiming the power I had given away for far too long. And though the road ahead is uncertain, I feel stronger, more resilient, and more confident in my ability to set the boundaries that will protect my peace. I don't know what the future holds, but I do know one thing for sure: I will never again let anyone, not even family, walk all over me. And that, I think, is the greatest lesson I could have learned.